How are you?
Good. I'm so happy. I just want to say thank you so much for coming. And for those of you that don't know, Normandi is a teacher. I've read a lot of your books, a lot of her books. I remember when I was in Cairo at the Egyptian Museum, I saw Imagining the World into Existence at the Cairo Museum. And I've studied a lot with Nikki Scully, who you worked with, and I'm currently studying under you right now. So I just want to extend out my gratitude and appreciation to you and all of your work. Your 14 books.
Thank you.
And just grateful you're here, and we're all ready to learn.
All right. I just have to say I'm grateful I'm here too. I took a fall a week ago. I was just saying, and I had a big goose egg under my eye and big owies on my shoulders, and I don't know if you can see it now, but I'm a little better. But I had an MRI today, so they gave me something to make me tolerate the claustrophobia. So if I'm a little slow in speaking tonight, you'll understand what that's about, okay? All right, so we're going to be talking about Book of the Dead, right? All right. And let me see. Is it okay if I just go ahead and start sharing the screen and we'll pop in and out? Is that okay?
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
All right. Sounds great. And that way, while I'm reading certain things, you won't see my crazy cat glasses, which are like this. Okay, so let's see what we can find. We'll get rid of that. There we go. Okay, we're going to start the slideshow here from the beginning. All right, so Egyptian books of the afterlife, because we're doing a section 1 and 2. Okay, and one of the things that I think is the most important thing to understand about these books of the afterlife is that all of life experience in the Egyptian version and in most everybody else's playbook, all of it exists in the mind of God. And so this is the most important thing that you can learn from studying any of the books of the afterlife, is that all of life experience exists within the mind of God, and that death is a transformative process that's part of the life experience. So death, the transformative part of life experience, also exists in the mind of God. And it's just another experience, just like life is. The books of the dead offer valid ways to tap into the layers of mind and into what is conscious and what is subconscious and what's unconscious and what's superconscious. The distinctions that can be made here between the levels of awareness and the altered states. When the current life ends and the Akashic records are opened and inscribed, the soul can see more clearly where it has been and what it has not developed into. So the question becomes, do you really want to wait until you're dead in order to understand that? Having some idea while you're still alive of how this realm operates prepares you for the deeply transformative death process.
Normandi, one quick thing. If we don't see anything on the screen, in case you were meant to have an image up there.
You don't see anything on my screen?
No.
That is crazy. Okay, so let me stop that. I'm going to escape. Okay, I'm going to go backwards. I don't know why you can't see the screen. Oh, maybe you have to give permission for me to share my screen.
Normandi, I made you the co-host.
Okay.
All you have to do is hit the shared screen. It's a green button on the bottom of your screen.
I thought I did that. Let me look. Let me pull you back up here and get this big deal going. Okay, share screen right there. Okay, let's try this. Okay, can you see that? Can you see that one, this one?
Yep, it's coming up. We're good.
Okay, so this is just the opening slide, and we'll just have this up for right now. Okay. So anyway, what I was saying is that the death experience is something that we need to prepare for in this lifetime. And in any tradition, whether you're looking at the ancient Egyptians or you're looking at the Tibetan Buddhists, you know, any of those faith traditions teach us how to turn death consciousness into life consciousness. And that's what the Book of the Dead is called, The Secret of Osiris Becoming Ra. It's an alchemical text. Alchemical meaning from the land of Kim or from Egypt. And so the secret of Osiris, which is death, it's the tomb, okay, is turning into life consciousness, which is Ra or Re in the heavens. And the point is that the two are one. Osiris is sometimes the name of a single god who is the double soul of the one God, the Bao of the two gods. They're two souls, Osiris and Re. And so the two processes, life and death, growth and decay, pattern and chaos, you can think of it as those polar opposites. They're the same energy. They're both gods of the light force. They are what physicists would call quanta. And in quantum physics, we're reminded of that double slit theory that demonstrates that consciousness is what affects light. Okay, remember when Thomas Young was observing a light being cast through two slits to see how it projected onto a screen, and when he was observing it, it appeared in a wave pattern, and when he turned away, it became a random scatter pattern. Okay, so that's the difference between Osiris and Ra or Re, is observation, is consciousness. They're both light sources, but they become dissolute when we're not paying attention to them, basically. And when we observe something, when we give it our attention, then it turns into a wave pattern. Okay, so that's the most important thing to remember when you're looking at all these books of the afterlife, that you are giving your mind a conscious pattern to deal with. And in observing this pattern, death diminishes as a chaotic challenge and element, because it then becomes part of the wave force. So studying the books of the afterlife is the whole secret of Osiris becoming Ra. That's just because you're paying attention to it, you're already transforming it. And it's something that you study, it's something that you integrate, you understand it in this lifetime, and you take it with you when you're on the other side. And they always say that the scribe was doubly blessed because he studied this his entire life, because he made copies of the books of the dead for everyone. So let's start the slideshow. I'm going to make this a little larger here. Okay. And I'm going to go to this. Let me see if I can reduce this little arrow here. Yeah. Okay. So this is recommended further reading. And of course, there's my books there, because every single book I've written about has been about Osiris and consciousness and Ra. So we talked before about imagining the world into existence, and the recent book, Hieroglyphic Words of Power, is also a book about consciousness and intention, and using the hieroglyphs with intentionality. Okay, and then other recommended reading. I don't have Nikki's books on here, but they would definitely be part of that. What I have here are academic books rather than books by transformative teachers. Okay, so the ones that I can say I highly recommend would be Rosemary Clark's Sacred Tradition in Ancient Egypt, Eric Horning, Conception of God in Ancient Egypt and Knowledge for the Afterlife, Lucy Lamy, Egyptian Mysteries. Oh my gosh, that's a fabulous book. John West, Serpent in the Sky. All of those are books that will sort of take you into both the mysteries as well as give you a sampling of the text. But if you wanted to learn more about the texts themselves, these other books are perfectly fine. You know, I think the Faulkner book and the Lichten books and the Pionkov books are my favorites for going back and reading the texts and, you know, figuring out what they mean to me in particular. And I think last time we were together, we talked about netter, nature, did we not? Didn't we talk about how everything is an aspect of God? All of the animals, all of the minerals, plants, everything was an aspect of God. And I think we talked about netter, which is another name for what the Egyptians called it, and nature being the same thing. So I won't belabor that point because I think we had the whole class on that the last time. Okay. Okay, so we'll skip through.
Normandy.
Yes.
I was in that class with you, but nobody else here was.
Nobody else here was?
I'm the only, and maybe Angela Synchro, so nobody else here knows all that stuff.
Oh, well, we'll just have to back up then. Okay. Let me see. How can I explain that? There was the idea that the Greeks learned a lot of what they knew about the divine world that we come to know as philosophy, but they got it all from the ancient Egyptians. And there was a man named Lucretius who was, I believe he was a Roman philosopher who studied with the Greeks. And he wrote a book called On the Nature of Things. And he talked a lot about the god Atum, or he called him Atom. And he said that the atom was the center point for everything that was created in the universe, and that it was invisible and it was multidimensional and it could not be divided. And he was talking about atoms, you know. So, okay, I'm going to go back and show you this. All of the divine beings in Egypt have some kind of I'm not going to say just symbolism, because they're really talking about the quality of being inside every single thing. Kephara is the dung beetle. He lays his eggs in a ball of cow manure, basically, and buries it in the ground. And then when it's dug up, it breaks open and all these little golden winged beetles fly out. And that became the symbol of transformation. And that was the secret of alchemy, of turning lead into gold, basically. Lead being an earthen matter, the most base stuff of your life, and then being able to turn it into something golden. And so that, you know, you can think of it as like just a dung beetle, but if you think about the dung beetle as being in here, because he rests right over your heart, you know, there's the image of the scarab that's right on the heart of every single mummy, and it's because it's our heart and the way we look at things that turns the negative parts of our life into something that is beautiful and workable. And, you know, my daddy used to call it turning shit into shinola, you know, but that's basically what that's talking about, is how to make something that's a negative in your life, turning it into a positive. The crocodile god Sobek was the god who was responsible for, because the crocodile lies low on the bottom of the river and only surfaces now and then goes back down. You know, he comes up for a snack and then he goes back down. And he's really a lot of that symbolism and that energy around him is about the things inside our subconscious or unconscious mind that when we are not aware of it, when we're not paying attention to it, it's going to rise up sometime and like look at us, you know, and it's like, oh my God, I haven't dealt with that yet, you know. It'll take its little snack, it'll take its little bite out of our lives and then go back down into the bottom. But Sobek is very useful God because he teaches us what it is that we have to transform. Okay, so when you notice that little place in your life where you have that, oh, where did that thought come from? Or, oh no, I remember doing this and I'm so ashamed now. Say thank you, Sobek, because he's there teaching you what it is you need to take from the unconscious and bring to consciousness. Now, Bast, the cat goddess, I really like her. I like my cats. They may go wandering around here today while we're talking. She is, her name, I love her name because when you break it down, it's Ba-Ast, the soul of Isis. And so she is the quintessential mother. She is the one that looks out for her babies and takes care of her progeny and kind of tucks her little kitties under her arm, licks them and takes care of them when they're hurt and they fall. I love Bast. She is very gentle. She is the counterpart to, you'll see the Sekhmet goddess in the lower right-hand corner. And Sekhmet is also a very strong mother, but she's not the nurturing mother. She's the other side of the mother that is like, don't you dare come near my cubs or you're in trouble. You know, I'll bite your head off. So Sekhmet is very much a protector. She's also very much a healer. If you've worked with Nikki Scully at all, you know that that's Nikki's favorite. That's one of Nikki's favorites, is Sekhmet, for her fierceness and for her loyalty. And I think there's also Thoth up there, the ibis god. He's the god of wisdom. I like Thoth for the lessons that he teaches us about how to bring to consciousness or how to bring up something that's down in the depths that we need to bring up for enlightenment. Now, the thing about an ibis is the way that it extends its wing over the water so that it casts a shadow over the water. And you can't go fishing in the water if you can't see where the fish are, but the shadow casts enough shade over top of the water that the ibis can see where the fish are and he can go in after exactly what he needs. So he's a symbol of meditating with intention. It's like, okay, I'm going to bait my hook. This is what I'm looking for. I need the answer to this question. And so you're taking that into the meditation, and Thoth is right there with you, helping you find what it is that you need. Next to him, we have the cow goddess. This is an image of Hathor, but in this particular form, she's called Mahet. She comes out of the papyrus swamp. But the cow goddess is very, very prominent all throughout Egypt. She was probably one of the most revered of all of the goddesses. she has those upraised cow horns that are sort of like the way that we pray with our hands up, reaching up towards spirit. She's that image of, bringing that heavenly spirit down through her essence and delivering it basically through her milk to all humankind. Next, we have Anubis. He's depicted here weighing the feather of the heart. And Anubis, like most dogs, has a great sense of smell. If you're trying to, a lot of times when I'm in Egypt, and you're trying to decide, something feels squishy here, and I don't know if I should be going along the program or if we need to take a divergent path here, because you have to kind of measure the energy of some of the trips sometimes. And I'll always check in with Anubis because he's the one who can smell, where something's not exactly right. He also takes care of Osiris in helping him to transform into unconscious into consciousness. He's with his father in the underworld, but he definitely goes in and out of the worlds, whereas Osiris, once he has died, no longer goes into the upper world. We have Isis here as Selket, the scorpion goddess, and there's a story about her being protective of herself, protective of her time, protective of her unborn child. And Selket really teaches us to pay attention to our intuition. Selket, the scorpion goddess, warned Isis that she needed to get out of a situation where Set was getting ready to do her in and do in her unborn child. And so the scorpion gave her enough warning that she was able to get out of that situation. So having a little instinct and protective energy around that, that's not bad sometimes to be stinging when you know that you're being approached in the wrong way. And the last one, of course, is Ra. This is actually Harakate, so that's Ra and Horus, the hawk god, all together. So that is the solar energy. That's the energy of the hero who goes through this quest from life to death, from death to life. Okay, now, how we make the transformation between worlds is through a magic called Heka. And there you see those upraised arms that are kind of like also indicative of the cow horns. This is a spiritual body called Ka. And this is the idea that our thoughts create our reality. That is why you have a Book of the Dead, because our thoughts create reality. And so we are transforming our thoughts as we continue to think about the Book of the Dead. The way to create Heka, and it's defined as magic, okay? The Egyptians called it effective utterance, but it's basically magic. And magic was how the ancient world operated. That was, if you wanted something done in the ancient world, you used your words of power. If you wanted to heal something, you used your words of power. You wrote an invocation to the healer, whoever you wanted to contact, Sekhmet, Thoth, Isis, depending upon whatever the illness was. And you used the proper words in the proper sequence. They were spoken with the proper intonation and the proper intention, the proper intent, proper words, proper sequence, proper intonation, and proper intent. And I always say that's the essence of an ancient Egyptian spelling bee, because that's how you cast a spell. You say the right thing You say the right things in the right order. You use your vibration of your vocal energy to put the emphasis behind it, and then you have your intention, which is set. Okay. Right. And they believe that with that, you could create anything in the ancient world. All things were possible at that point. The Book of the Dead operates through Heka. Now, the Greeks borrowed that same concept of a magic spell in the negative and gave that power to Hecate, right? So that's kind of an interesting little aside about the magic. And it sometimes appears as a frog, you know, frogs being the essence of transformative. So again, it's like Hecate. Okay. Where did that magic come from? Thoth. It came from Thoth. The Book of the Dead was said to have been, at least 42 chapters of it, were said to have been written with his own fingers, that he created the words of power. Thoth, the Atlantean, may have brought them with him when Atlantis sunk. He may have been the high magician there. But Imhotep, who was a priest of Thoth, knew the God within. He knew Thoth as his master teacher. And Imhotep is the guy that we credit with. He's not the scary guy in the mummy movies. He's the guy who built the step pyramids, who created the whole courtyard in which the mysteries were enacted as a mystery play and a mystery rite at Saqqara. He aligned everything astronomically so that things happened at the right times according to which stars were rising. He was responsible for putting the texts of transformation, the very first texts, into words. And so really, he was like the Leonardo da Vinci of the ancient world. He was in the third dynasty, way back in the early Old Kingdom. And by the time that he was being recognized in the New Kingdom, back in the, like 18th dynasty, the scribes looked at Imhotep and said, oh, he was a god too. And they would, before they would start working, they would pour out libations of beer and bread for him, spread the bread for him. So he was given offerings as if he were a god. That's how important Imhotep was. And his name means I come in peace. Okay. So the Book of What is in Duat. This is the actual title, the Book of What is in Duat. Okay. Duat is the underworld. Duat is the unconscious. Duat is the place where Osiris lives. And the Book of What is in Duat, I'm trying to, let me see this for just a second because I cannot read this exactly right now. Okay. To know the boss souls of the Duat, to know what is done, to know the spiritual enlightenment of Re, to know the secret boss souls, to know what happens in the hours in their gods, to know what to say to them, to know the gates and the ways in which the great God passes, to know the flourishing and the annihilated. Okay, so that is basically the title for the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And we'll go into more depth when we're looking at the Egyptian Book of the Dead later. But what you see there is an image of a person in the underworld who is uh, confronting a serpent whose name is the coiled one, the great coiled one. Sometimes he's called Mehen. Sometimes he's depicted as an Ouroboros, biting his tail, a beginning and an end. But you see, he's kind of, what I am interested in is the way these coils of the serpent, who is a form of Atum, the hidden god, look like DNA connections. I'm fascinated with the way that and the sign of infinity and the repeating lives and all of that comes into how that looks. Okay. If you could control the serpent in the underworld, you could control the body and the spirit. So that is what that text is about, controlling it by knowing what it does and what it looks like and what to say to it. Think about it as controlling your thoughts, what it does, what they do, what they should not be doing, to know the passages that are opening in your life. It's pretty good. Okay, so there's 3 different kinds of eras, I'm going to say, that talk about the different categories of the books of the afterlife. Now, the pyramid texts are the very first ones. They are possibly the oldest known religious texts in the world. And these were around the dates of 2400 to 2300. That's about a time frame of the 5th kingdom. Okay. And they were written in old Egyptian hieroglyphs alone. They were just hieroglyphs. They were carved into the walls, and sometimes on the sarcophagi, but not often, mostly just carved into the walls. And you see them a lot of times. These particular ones you see come from Saqqara, the 5th and 6th dynasties. It was an unillustrated text. I'm going to see if I can flip through here just real fast, if you can see that. Yeah. That's what the wall looks like right there. Okay. So this unillustrated text, the pictures are actually the glyphs themselves, which are sounds, which are parts of speech, parts of the word. And you see there's no space in between them, right? So there's a particular trick to figuring out what each glyph means. Like, say, for example, can you see my cursor here, right? Okay. It's going around the hieroglyph of Unas, which is the name of the pharaoh. His name means the good being. Okay. So it says, Unas says, okay, when he comes forward, open the gates of heaven. Okay, so that's what that is right there. All right. That's a whole sentence, but there's no spaces in between it. So you're looking at particular sounds and images that are working simultaneously. Okay. Now the oldest texts were intended for the pharaoh. They weren't intended for anyone else. The pharaoh was the only person who needed to have access to these. And the other thing that you'll notice is that these glyphs are not carved into the wall. They come out from the wall in bas-relief, which is very difficult to accomplish. And they're so precise. It's, someone has told me it almost looks like a laser did it, and it does. They are each individual. They're not cookie cutter forms. So it's really quite interesting. And these utterances inside the pyramid text are mostly concerned with reanimating and protecting and resurrecting the Pharaoh after death, helping him to ascend also to Akhet, Akhet. And that was a place that was called the Light Land. You know, sometimes you've heard, maybe you've heard of spiritualists calling it Summerland. It's the same thing. Akhet means the horizon. So it's the land, and the western land, the land where the sun sets and the sun is shining. Okay, and so they're going into the sun, Akhet. Okay. And when the sun sets, then they go into heaven, which is the body of the sky goddess Nut, and we'll look at that in a minute. The coffin texts are over here, okay? And they happened in the Middle Kingdom. Now, between these three periods of time, there were intermediate years in which there was a lot of conflict. The flood wasn't coming as it should. People were starving. There were foreign invaders. I mean, there was a lot of chaos and conflict between the Old Kingdom, before the Middle Kingdom, after the Middle Kingdom, before the New Kingdom. And it took a really strong Pharaoh to pull that energy back into where it needed to be so that the country didn't collapse. So we've had an intermediate period between the pyramid texts and the coffin texts. And by the time we get the coffin texts, the people who are looking at these sacred texts for transformation, and I mean, they're trying to say, well, we want that too. You know, you're talking about the everyman and the resurrection. And, you know, I have been your chief visor for forever. I've been your vice president. I've been your, you know, the person who was in charge of writing all of your books and scribing your texts and your sacred prayers. I took care of the statues when you weren't there. I was your high priest. I need that same thing that you have, right? And so then they began creating coffin texts. They weren't building monuments for all of these people because that would have bankrupted the country and taken too long. So each coffin was made of wood, wood being a very highly prized commodity because trees don't grow in Egypt. You had to import them. And so the text that would have been written on the walls is now being written on these boxes. And I'll show you later, it's inside the box and outside the box. And this is during the 11th through the 14th dynasties. And then there's a little conflict in between there, okay? And then the Book of the Dead comes, and then the sort of, anybody who could afford to pay to make their way into the afterlife wanted the opportunity to have a Book of the Dead. Now, people were illiterate. You know, this is the New Kingdom. This is the heights of Ramses and, you know, that whole thing. But the illiterate people said, I want in there too. So they said, okay. And so they would make a Book of the Dead for them, but they couldn't read it because they didn't know how to read the hieroglyphs. And you'll notice that at this point, the glyphs themselves are just looking a little bit more like shorthand rather than like the actual glyphs in the pyramid text. You know, so they're cramming them in and putting the individual information in it. And they said, okay, we'll tell you what it says. We'll draw you a picture up at the top so that you can see what's being said below. Okay, and then every time you have something in the red, that's like the title of the next chapter. Okay, so that's how you figure out where the titles of the chapters are. Okay. So, and these are the dates, you know, 2080 to 1640. That was the Middle Kingdom. And there were a lot of dynasties that lasted no more than, you know, a couple of months, really. It was that fast. Book of the Dead, 1550 to 50 BC. And then around 50 BC, you're getting into the Ptolemaic era, the Greeks and the Romans around that time pretty much around 200 BC come in and take over, but they were continuing to have books of the dead for the Ptolemaic folk. And again, they were written in hieroglyphs because that was the Heka, but nobody could read them if they were Greek or Roman, so the pictures, again, made more sense to them. Okay, so these pyramid texts, they're really the most fascinating to me, the pyramid texts. There are 714 different, what they call utterances, okay? And when you look at them, this is the inside of that pyramid. You can see on the right, there's a burial chamber. It has a sarcophagus in it. Sarcophagus means sacred eating. And that was supposedly where the body was kept, although the body was never found. What you see around that sarcophagus, believe it or not, is not hieroglyphs. It is depiction of tapestries. And so they are tapestries very much like we'll call it the web of life that were woven, the web that was woven by the goddess Neith. And she wove the pattern of life. And so and death. And so that's in that room where the sarcophagus is. There is also in that room, facing the sarcophagus, offerings of food for the afterlife, food and drink, and something called the cannibal hymn, which we'll get into in a minute. Now, going into this particular room here, this is you're looking out from the sarcophagus room, which here you can see it covered with stars. This vaulted ceiling is covered with stars like the night sky. That's supposed to represent the body of the sky goddess. And then it's looking out into another room, which is antechamber. And it's just also filled entirely with glyphs. So we can look and see from the outside, it doesn't look like much. You know, it looks like a pile of rubble, basically, because they have scraped off all of the limestone stones that kept it together to, you know, rebuild bridges and canals and stuff in Egypt. So that's where they got the stone. It had already been quarried. They just pulled it, figured, well, those old dead Egyptians don't need it. So they took their stones. And you can see it's kind of falling apart on the outside. But on the inside, it's still very pristine. This is a better image of what that tapestry looks like. And the sky up above it, as well as what the stars look like. You know, and each one of those stars is 5-pointed. In the underworld, you'll see a circle, like a pentagram, a circle with a star inside of it. And that indicates that that's the inside of the sky mother's body. That's like her womb with a baby inside that little circle. And each star represents every person that ever was, that ever will be, or is now. So all of her children are represented in the sky. And what I like in looking at this is that, again, it's not cookie cutter. All of the stars are individual. They're very different. Not one star looks exactly alike. Okay, so let me make sure I get down to the right one. Okay, so this on the bottom to the right is the actual pyramid layout, Pyramid of Unas, that has those inscriptions that I showed you. There are people who believe that these inscriptions are mostly ceremonial. They believe that they were part of a shamanic tradition, and The best book on that is by Jeremy Nadler called Shamanic Wisdom in the Pyramid Texts. But you'll see that this is a very long corridor in, okay, a descending tunnel. And then you go inside and there's this womb chamber. And then there's this sarcophagus room where the seed is. And then this is another room. I always think this looks like a birth canal and fallopian tubes and the womb. You know, that's kind of the way it's set up. And what's interesting enough is that on the walls, there are descriptions of Isis giving birth to Horus and the goddess Neith giving birth to Sobek. So there are descriptions of giving birth to either a conscious being or an unconscious being. And it's almost as if it's written on the walls, you know, of the womb. You have your choice, you know, which way you're going to live your life. Now, what predates it is the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid at Giza, and that's the 4th dynasty. But it also has that, you know, descending chamber, and very much, it is not inscribed, but there are little, what they call air passages, but they are little double slits, I'm going to say, that view the night sky, where they point directly to Sirius and Orion's belt. So it's an astronomical observatory, okay? And then this, of course, is the 3rd dynasty step pyramid. I love how it's got these 7 layers, you know, like building up from the ground, chakras, and going up. And it again has no inscriptions. It was ceremonial primarily. There are 7 serpents that guard this gateway into the courtyard. Yeah, and it was the very first pyramid of its kind that we know. Okay, stargates. I believe that everything in ancient Egypt, every single temple, every single tomb, everything is aligned to a particular star. There's a lot that you can learn from mainly Palmer Hall's book, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, about what he calls astrotheology. I love that term. You can find it on YouTube. He does a talk on astrotheology, and I think it's absolutely lovely. And what you see is that here in this second image, you have the Milky Way right here. And I love the staircase up into the heavens. And you can almost see like someone standing there, you know. It's in imitation of the Grand Gallery that is inside the Great Pyramid that you walk up, you know, as you're going inside the Pharaoh's chamber, the King's Chamber. And so this symbol over here is that circle with the star inside it, and that means the underworld, or the gateways, the gateway into the underworld. There are considered, you'll see later, 12 gates in the underworld that you have to go through, just like there's 12 hours of the night, and there's 12 gates in the daytime that we have to go through as well. Okay, so Osiris is a Sahu. Sahu is a name that means an ascended master. A Sahu is an ascended master. It's a being that appears as light. And anytime that you have ever seen, I suppose, an angel, you would be looking at a Sahu. The Theosophists said that, DK and Saint Germain and Lord Lanta and Serapis Bey all were Sahus that were beings of light who came to the earth to teach us and still come back and forth because they're eternal. Well, Osiris is considered the Sahu, and he is the constellation Orion, the image of the risen God. Orion is important because it spends 72 hours below the horizon, 72 days below the horizon. It will set, or Osiris will fall into the water, they say. He's thrown into the water by his brother Set and sinks to the bottom and floats out of Egypt, and he's gone, as the constellation is gone, for 72 days. And Isis goes looking for him and follows him. Isis is Safdet, right? Isis is the star Sirius. She and her sister Nephthys and Anubis are actually Sirius A, Sirius B, and Sirius C. There are three major stars that predict the rising of Osiris, the rising of Orion. And when they appear right before the sun rises, then it's a brand new year. It signifies that everything is starting all over again. And that time of year is right now. July, I think 19th is considered in the ancient world the rising of Sirius. So anyway, it's the two sisters and Anubis that make Sirius very, very bright in the sky, the brightest star in the sky. And the Dogons of Africa knew all about the fact that there were three stars in the Sirius configuration. Well before, they didn't have any astronomy or anything, but they somehow knew this. And some people say that they were taught by beings from the world that came to Earth and taught the Dogons. But it's quite interesting that this part of the Osirian and Isis myth comes to us from the ancient African tribes. Now, together, Isis and Osiris signify the new beginnings and the opening of the new year, which starts in July. The opening of the new year has incredible significance at this period of time because you have two rivers in the Nile, and one is the White Nile and one is the Blue Nile. And they both start to converge at this time of the year. One of them comes from the melting snows of Kilimanjaro, deeper in Africa, and the other one comes from the Ethiopian monsoons that are filling the other river. And so these two rivers are like coming, flooding down. They meet at Khartoum, and then they become the Nile proper. So there's a White Nile and a Blue Nile, and they become the Nile proper at Khartoum. They have to go through all of these rocky formations, and they're tumbling and they're tossing and they're, and they're also like pushing all of the effluvia, all of the red algae and yucky stuff, dead vegetation out of the birth canal of Egypt. They're cleansing. It's like the Nile is a menstrual flow, and it's pushing everything out and bringing with it this fertile, dark soil where things will start to grow again. And so this is the beginning of the new year. This is also, when the river runs red, they say that is the symbol of Sekhmet, because Sekhmet has this linked to a story of where, you know, she is devouring rivers of blood. And she's basically, you know, also connected to this period of time where the effluvia is being pushed out of the riverbed. Okay. All right. Let's see. So this is utterance 373 from the pyramid text. Oh ho, oh ho, rise up, Unas, take your head, collect your bones, gather your limbs, shake earth from your flesh. The gatekeeper comes to you. He grasps your hand, takes you to heaven to your Father. He rejoices at your coming, gives you his hands, kisses you, caresses you, sets you before the spirits, the imperishable stars. The hidden ones worship you. The great ones surround you. The watchers wait on you. Rise up, O Unas, you shall not die. Okay, and so this particular utterance is talking about not only the resurrection of Osiris, but astronomically, it is giving you, down here you see this image of Isis, Sothis in her boat, and you see Orion, Osiris as Orion in his boat, and these little boats that are sailing by here are considered the constellations that move around the equator. Okay, but this boat is sailing upward and sailing upward. And you see up here, these are the more permanent stars. These are what they call the imperishable ones, or the circumpolar stars. Now, it's interesting to me that when we first see an Egyptian zodiac, and that's in the Temple of Dendera. It is in a circle, but the constellation that's in the center of it is not Ursa Major. It is Draco, the dragon. And that tells us that it was as far back as when Draco was the pole star that Egypt began paying attention to these stories and these stellar myths. Okay, and I think that, you know, that probably goes back to around 14,000 BC, if I'm not mistaken. That's rather interesting. So these texts are alluding to a time before time before time. And one wants to go up into the heavens, because that's where the ancestors live. That's where the gods, the eternal gods and goddesses live. And they're the ones who have the master plan. And so that is an intention, that you go up to heaven and receive the master plan. And so here you can see also climbing the top of the step pyramid. You would be standing at the center under the pole star and watching the constellations turn and watching the seasons turn. And all of the stars we just talked about were the divine beings, were the gods or the goddesses. They were like the angels that you're watching march through heaven, up and down the ladder of heaven, like Jacob's ladder. And the image of Osiris as a jade pillar is also about Jacob's ladder, but it's like the ladder of Jacob is within us. Okay, so the ladder is tied together by Re before Osiris. The ladder is tied together by Horus before his father. One of them is on this side, one of them is on that side. Unas stands between them, and there's an interrogation. Are you a god whose places are pure? I come from a pure place. Stand here, Unas, says Horus. Sit here, Unas, says Set. Take this arm, says Re. The spirit belongs to heaven, the body to earth. And I think it also, there are other pyramid texts that say body to earth, soul to sky, similar to ashes, dust to dust. It's a similar kind of statement. But what I like about it is the fact that it speaks of duality, the going up and coming back down, the positive aspect of life and the negative aspect of life, the Osiris aspect of life and the Re aspect of life. And Horus is the warrior who moves in between them. I like those images. Now, the cannibal hymn is unique to the Pyramid of Unas. It doesn't exist in any of the other texts that we've ever seen. So, but I don't think of it as actually, it's just called the cannibal hymn. I think of it as transubstantiation. I don't know if any of you know that word from, if you've been in Catholic school or have ever had communion, but it's the body of the divine that is taken and eaten and internalized so that we partake in the divine spirit. It's a recognition that everything that we eat is a god or a goddess. It all is. Okay. So anyway, but this also is a description that kind of sounds like the crucifixion, I think. Sky rains, stars darken, the earth's bones quiver. Stars stand still at seeing Unas rise as an auk, that is like a phoenix, a god who lives on his fathers and feeds on his mothers. Unas is the bull of the sky, the Ka. He lives on the being of every god. He eats his entrails. He ingests their magic. Okay. All right, let me see what we got here. There's that one, there's that one, there's this one. Amun. Isn't that a cool picture? Amun Ra as a cobra with the sun on his head. So he appears as the Alpha and the Omega. That he is the serpent in the underworld, but because there's no depictions of him as a serpent, he's considered the hidden god. I am the outflow of the primeval flood, he who emerged from the waters. I am the provider of attributes, the serpent with its coils. I am the scribe of the divine book, which says what has been and affects what is yet to be. Okay. And this again is a text of transformation into the next world, an ascension text, as it were. He flies, he flies, he flies away from you, O men. He is no longer upon earth, he is in the sky. He rushes at the sky like a heron. He has kissed the sky like a fountain, like a falcon. He has leapt skyward. Okay. And what you see is that the pyramid itself is built to symbolize the upper stages of spirit life, the top three tier, I would say like the capstone of a pyramid, are the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak. The Ka is spirit. It is what is the animating principle of life. But the animating principle of life doesn't stay there. It is attached to us. It's attached to our name. The animating spirit of you remembering your grandmother Maud or your grandmother Sally, is animating Sally's spirit. But when there's no one to remember Sally anymore, the Ka dissolves. However, her Ba, which is her soul, does not dissolve. It is an eternal principle, and it is constantly growing and renewing and acquiring new attributes and new life processes, even in the spirit world. It can even acquire new lives. The Ak is the divine intelligence. It's the spark of God that's within everything. you know. And so you realize that the upper world, which is ruled by the birds, has to do with, you know, the images, the hieroglyphs of the spirit world. And the cot, which is the lower world, is a fish, you know. And that's the lowest part of the body. That's just the container. That's the stuff of life. It's not real. It's interesting to me that the word ka and ak are kind of like anagrams of each other. The KH sound is a single hieroglyph, like a TH sound would be a single hieroglyph. So an ak is, you know, with the T is a feminine, but its converse is spirit, which
Can't hear.
Looks like she froze.
Moving.
Normandy, I think you froze. Do we lose her?
We lost her. We'll just wait for her to come back on.
Isn't she great, everybody?
Love
Ah,
this.
she's so good.
So much.
And she's just rolling too, just like duh, 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 duh. I can't keep up.
I'm gonna text her to let her know in case she doesn't know that we lost her.
As Laura, you guys are so here. You missed your flight.
What?
You missed your flight.
No, our flight got canceled. We did not get notified by the airline. So we got there right on time. Really early. But we're here.
We're back.
Bravo
We're
is
back.
still there too.
I don't know if
I think.
okay, here we go. Phew. So, but we're basically through with that part of the presentation. So this is probably a good time. It cut off all by itself. So questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so it would be a good time for questions because we only have about 15 more minutes anyway.
Wow.
Um,
I have a question.
go ahead.
Oh, we're unmuted. Can you one more time just quickly say what the relationship was with Draco and the constellation? I didn't remember if you said it was like at the center of their like cosmology wheel, or if it was what the step ladder led to.
It was the pole star. It was the pole star, like the pole star of the Great Bear. Around 14,000 BC. That was the pole star. So by the time the step pyramid is coming in, it's beginning to shift over into where we see it now. But originally, when it was part of the savannah, it was just, you know, and there's I think it's called the Nabta Playa in Africa, Nabtaplaya. It's a Stonehenge that's older than the Stonehenge in England, and it's out in the middle of the desert, and it relates to that particular constellation, to Draco.
I have a question, Normandy.
Okay.
Would you talk a little bit more about the relationship between the Ba and the Ka and like how those like work together in a lifetime?
Okay. All right. So here's a story. Your Ka is what enlivens anything, that makes it alive, that makes like if you have a statue of Isis or Thoth on your altar, and you go to it and you pray, and you spend time meditating before it, and you're putting your energy out into it, you are activating the statue, right? You are using your Ka energy to connect with its Ka energy. And so the next time you go into your meditation room, sometimes it feels like the room's vibrating. You know how that is? That's Ka energy. There are statues that are in the little chapels. I would guess they're kind of like Mexican little chapels where the Virgin of Guadalupe is, and so there's this weeping virgin, and she is over off in this corner, and then there's the Christ, and he's on his cross, and he's bleeding, and he's got his crown of thorns, and you've seen those pictures. And in this one particular place, there's a statue of the Virgin Mary that appears to move around the chapel. It keeps trying to go to the statue of Jesus, and it weeps these bloody tears, and so someone said, someone's coming in here and messing with us, that's not really happening. And so they chained this statue of the goddess to the floor so that she wouldn't move. And lo and behold, she broke her chain and she started scooting toward the floor again, up toward the altar. This story is recounted in a book called The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. I cannot remember the man's name who wrote it, but the book is called The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. And that's really a depiction of Ka energy. It is so that statue is so prayed to and honored, and people have so much devotion, and their lives are a mess, and they're separated from their children, and they go into this little chapel and they pray to the Virgin to bring them some relief, and she's moved by their prayers. That's Ka energy. Okay, that's the kind of energy that was inside the Ark of the Covenant that was said to, strike a person dead if they blasphemed. That's Ka energy. Now, we all have that. All of us have Ka energy, and so do the things that we own. You can do readings off of objects that people have owned, like your great-grandfather's watch, because it has his Ka energy in it. Right? Okay. So, but if nobody is paying attention to great-grandfather's watch or the statue or, the person, not saying their name anymore, not giving them any honor, then that energy dissipates. Okay. And that is why the ancient Egyptians would say in the cemetery, and as they went through the underworld, they would say my name that I may live, because you're giving me my Ka. Give me my Ka. Okay. Ba energy is eternal. It doesn't ever go away. It is the soul's purpose. It is the plan of the particular soul to enact this lifetime's energy and to continue to gain consciousness until it no longer needs a vehicle to exist, right? It would just be a pure light being, which then is like the phoenix or the Akh, okay? But the Ba doesn't exist just when you're dead. I had this dream class that I was teaching one time, and there was this woman in my dream class, and she didn't know that I knew anything about Egypt, and she didn't know anything about Egypt. And she said to me, I had this dream about a hawk I held my arm out, and this hawk came and dug its claws in my arm. And she said it was really scary. It just kept looking at me. And I said, well, what did that hawk look like? Because the hawk, the human-headed hawk, is a bob. You know, that's how it's depicted. It's a hawk with our face on it. You know, and I said, so what did this hawk look like? And she said, oh, well, it was like really old, and its eyes were runny and weepy, and it was kind of bald, and it had big ears, and you know, it sort of looked like my dad. You know, and I thought, okay. You know? And so I asked her the obvious question, is your father in spirit? And she said to me, no, he has Alzheimer's and he doesn't remember me. And I thought, oh yeah, he does. You know, he's like attached to your arm. He's like, okay, I'm still here, you know. It was a very interesting dream. So our Ba's go out and do things at, you know, they will be going and traveling while we're asleep. You know, they will, when there is something that we desire to make conscious our life's purpose, you know, the Ba can go out and get it and bring it back to us, you know. So it is often the energy vessel that I use, that Nikki Scully and I use when we are doing past life regression. We will take our Ba and we will send it out into the night sky to look for that shining piece that has been separated from us and try to bring it back. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Okay. I can't hear you. Oops, oops.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Yes, I can. Right.
Thanks. I would love to know, like, what is your one kind of favorite, like, ritual or practice that you do that you find really supportive to kind of bring all of this kind of information embodied? Because we've been doing a lot of the receiving, you know, via word, and I just would love to know if you have any practices that you've used that you find really supportive to embody this cosmological wisdom.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I really like to do is to do automatic writing with one of the divine beings. And so I'll get into a meditative trance and do automatic writing. And to get into that space, one of the things that I often do is to invoke the goddesses of the directions. Okay. Starting in the east, where we're opening the doors into spirit, I will set Isis there. And she will stand there to usher in, you know, a new understanding or a new awareness. I will often sit in meditation facing east when I am trying to access new information for a new path. Okay. And then I'll invoke the goddess Sekhmet. Sometimes I'll also include Selket as goddesses of the south. Okay, and those are my fire goddesses. You know, my scorpion and my lion goddess, and those are my protectors. Whenever I am in need of protection, if I am walking down the street, you know, in a strange town, you know, I've given a talk and I have to go out and eat now, and I'm by myself and everybody's gone home, and I'm walking a dark street, and suddenly somebody's coming toward me that doesn't look like they have good intentions, you know. I just put my hands down on top of my lion heads. I have Sekhmet and I have Tefnut, my 2 lions. And so they are my protectors, and I work with them a lot. You know, a lot of people use Anubis. I use Sekhmet and Tefnut. Okay, so they're in the south. Nephthys is in the west. She's the goddess who is Isis's sister. She wears on her head a crown she's called the Lady of the House, and she has a libation cup on top of her head, so she's kind of connected to the waters. She's considered, Isis is very much a magical being, a being of invocation. But I always think of Nephthys as a being of seeing, you know, that she's the one who sees into the dark, you know. And so I work with her with that energy. And then to the north, I work with Neith, the goddess Neith. And she is the weaver. She's considered the great grandmother of ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses. She was the only goddess who was a creator goddess. And she wove this net of being around herself. She was connected to the Mediterranean, which is in the north of Egypt. She wove this net of being around herself, and she reached into herself and pulled out everything that took life. And, you know, her name, N-T, Neith, we call her Neith, but her original name in Egypt was N-T, net, like to knit something, you know, like we knit a child inside of us, like we knit the cloth of life. And from her name, we get the word netter. That's for a god or a goddess. So she's the great one, and I love to work with her. These 4 goddesses stand exactly in those directions around the shrine of Tutankhamun. So they're nice to put around your bed too and send you off to sleep. Now, if you're wanting to meditate on something that's an eternal principle, face north, face Neith, and face north. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Anybody else?
Well, I just wanted to say, Normandi, that you didn't realize, I never told you that our whole Oracle Arts apprenticeship is working with those 4 pillars. So I just wanted to appreciate, I just want to appreciate the like synchronicity of that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you didn't tell me that.
No?
Surprise!
Oh,
Do you want to say something, Caitlin? Caitlin, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I was just wondering, I think you were mentioning that there are, so was it Sirius and the Big Dipper that the air slots in the Great Pyramid point to? What time of year is
Sirius
that?
and Orion.
Oh, Sirius and Orion. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
what time of year?
Question again?
Oh, what time of year do the air slots point there?
They align with that July period of time.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I had another question around, I've never heard Sirius C before. I've heard of A and B, but where is this mysterious C, and why is it not spoken to?
It just got discovered. So the A is Isis. The B, we always knew, was Anubis, who follows Isis everywhere she goes. C is Nephthys, who's the hidden goddess, the one that's not seen very often, her sister. But there are 3 of them. Okay, come on, come on. Buffy wants to come and visit. There's Buffy. Yes. Okay, anybody else? Looks like we're close to time now, right?
I'd like to say something. Thank you very, very much. We have been so excited. Isis talks about you all the time and everything, and it is such a pleasure. And I know I'm speaking for all of us because we talk about you all the time. We are so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm really glad and I'm grateful for this opportunity.
I have one quick question, and it might be kind of a tricky one, and I don't know if this is
If it's
offensive
tricky,
to ask.
it's not quick.
Okay, well, I just don't know if it's offensive to ask an author this, but of all of your books, where would you say would be the place to start?
Awakening Osiris.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, because that is the Book of the Dead that I translated. It took me 10 years to translate that book from the hieroglyphs. And I did comparisons between texts, and I looked at other scripts actually to try to figure out if there was a connection between like Sanskrit and hieroglyphs. And so I looked at a lot of different connections, and it took about 10 years to work that. But I'm going to say that doing that, I used Wallace Budge's book that has the hieroglyphs actually in his text. I don't like his translation at all, but I like the fact that he put the glyphs back in, you know? So if you were interested in learning how to write your own Book of the Dead, which I highly recommend, I would say take those glyphs and take some various translations and see what you can come up with, you know, and just spend your time, you know, writing a hymn to Ra by using those hieroglyphs and looking at it. It's really very beautiful thing to do.
And we're doing a class with you later on in the year on hieroglyphic thinking too, which I'm super excited about.
Yes. Yes.
A new book that just hieroglyphic thinking.
Do you have a favorite book of translation for the hieroglyphs?
Well, of what is closest to, oh gosh, I would say one of the most poetic translations of some of the hieroglyphic texts are by a man named John Foster. And he is a poet who has translated them. I looked at some of his when I was working with my translations. I'm trying to think who else. You know, there are so many interesting books in Egypt, you know. Did you know that Florence Nightingale wrote a whole book about Egypt? I know. It's an amazing book. She went into the countryside and talked to the men and the women there and found that their myths and their stories that they were living at that time were related to the old myths. It's just fascinating, you know? So, yeah, you can find all kinds of good stuff like that.
And do you, John Anthony West, do you recommend, I love him, do you recommend Anthony West?
Absolutely. I miss him every single day. He was the most amazing man. He really was, and I highly recommend John West. I like Graham Hancock. I like Robert Bauval. I like, back to your whole thing about when the constellations moved. There's a book by a man named Rand, like Randy, Rand Flemath, Flem-ATH, and his wife Rose. He co-authored it with her, and the book is called When the Sky Fell, and it's all about the shifting of the polar caps when the North Pole and the South Pole shifted, the sinking of Atlantis, and how he discovered it based on looking at a Landsat image of Antarctica. It's a very fascinating book.
I have a question. Is there just the relationship of Lemuria and Atlantis in relationship to Egypt? Anything about
Well,
that?
I think that I do believe they're precursors. I believe there's a lot of speculative writing about it. I read a lot about it. I don't speculate on it because there are so many people who do, and there's nothing that can be proved. And yet, why is it that the Viracocha and Osiris, the Viracocha in Peru and Osiris in Egypt are the same? It's like, why is the Ollantaytambo and that sacred river like the Nile? Why do they make at Lake Titicaca, they make boats out of reeds the same way that they do in ancient Egypt? It's like there's some connection there. I don't know what it is, but I believe it's there. My primary interest has been the Old Kingdom and to work with that. But I think that looking at what Graham Hancock has to say is really fascinating because he'll take you there. Yeah.
And when you refer to ancient Egypt, are you referring primarily, what are you primarily referring to, Old Kingdom or?
Mostly Old Kingdom and pre-dynastic. Yeah.
Pre-dynastic. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions for the group? Because I could keep asking away, so just want to
Okay.
see.
Yeah, it's 10 o'clock and I got to go get my PJs.
Oh, thank you, Normandi. Oh my God, thank you so much.
Oh, you guys, it was great. It was great seeing you and being with you all, and I appreciate the opportunity. I really do. All right, so I'll see you in a month and we'll continue our discussions. All right, bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sweet.
So does that mean we have to hang up now?
Isn't she amazing? Aren't we so stoked?